Good evening or good afternoon. Welcome to the November 30th workshop. So I'll call to order the Chino City Council and the successor agency to the redevelopment agency to order. And I'd like to ask Councilperson Comstock to lead us in the flag salute.
Thank you, Mayor. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please join me in saluting our nation's flag? Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Karen. First thing on our agenda is public comments. I do have two written requests to speak under item number 1. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council on anything that is not on the agenda this evening? Okay, seeing none, then we will move on to our continued new business. Item number 1, initial findings of industrial development moratorium on properties north of Schaefer Avenue. This item is to review staff's initial findings for industrial properties and provide direction for potential future changes to the city's general plan and/or development standards. I'd like to ask for a staff report from our Director of Development Services, Nick Lagori.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. On October 19th, the City Council enacted an urgency ordinance for a 45-day moratorium on industrial development north of Schaefer Avenue. The moratorium arose from specific concerns about the impact of industrial development on the city, including increased truck traffic and potential conflicts with residential properties adjacent to existing industrial areas. Since that time, staff has conducted a preliminary analysis of infill industrial development in the city and will present our initial findings and request additional direction from the council today. Staff's analysis focused on 4 main subject areas: truck traffic, economic feasibility, input from the development community, and comparisons to other cities in the Inland Empire with industrial areas. The analysis used 4 sample locations, which are shown on the map. So these locations are future potential industrial development areas. In analyzing for potential truck traffic, staff looked at hypothetical development scenario for each of the sites, one that was based upon the existing general industrial land use designation, which would essentially allow for one large building to be built, and then another which would require the construction of a business park type model, which would be multiple smaller buildings on a site. In looking at national statistical averages for traffic generation, generally multiple buildings will generate more traffic, both truck and automobile, than one larger building on a site. However, it's important to note that each business has its own traffic demands and generation rates, and so in looking at kind of national averages, we're getting a very, very broad approach. You could have industrial businesses that generate less truck traffic. You could have the same type of business, but because of what they do, could generate more traffic. So it kind of depends, but generally if you have smaller buildings on a site, you have more businesses, and each of those businesses has its own traffic generation. And so kind of using this national statistical average, you would potentially generate more traffic. But it's really hard to ascertain the quality of that traffic without knowing specific business types that would go into those buildings. Secondly, the city utilized a consultant to perform a very preliminary economic analysis of the sites, which sought to answer 4 questions. 1, what is the likelihood of development for the sites if they were to change from their current industrial designations to a business park type of designation, which only allows a maximum building size of 25,000 square feet? Secondly, what would be the likelihood of development if the sites were to change to a non-industrial designation, like a commercial or residential development? Thirdly, what are the expected revenues to be generated from the development of these sites with their current land use designation and the service costs associated with that? And then fourthly, what are expected revenues and service costs for a non-industrial land use designation? So what we found is that based on current market conditions, general industrial development would currently yield the highest land values because that's what the market is demanding at this time. It would also provide higher revenues relative to service costs. Commercial and business park development would generally be feasible on these sites as well. However, the probability of that development coming to fruition is lower, which essentially means it just may take more time for that property to be absorbed if it were to, say, be designated for a commercial use, because there's not as much demand for commercial land use right now than there is for industrial land. Residential development was generally considered unsuitable to these areas because they are in existing industrial areas and there are existing industrial businesses that surround them. Additionally, because of the parcel sizes, most of them don't have enough land for single-family type residential, so it would have to be like a multifamily rental type configuration if it were to be utilized for that use at all. The industrial development community expressed similar observations, and mainly that there's a limited market for small business park type buildings. The absorption of those buildings takes a much longer time than the absorption of larger buildings. Our current industrial vacancy rate is 0.2, so it's extremely low, and so that is representative of the fact that we have kind of the right balance of square footages and building sizes in the community to meet the market demand. In that changing the land use of the properties from their current designation to a non-industrial designation could potentially impact the value by 75% or more. Based upon the current, because of the high demand and the low vacancy rate, the lease rates are very high right now. So that's a factor that's driving the land values. Also, it was noted that restricting the development of these mid-size industrial buildings could impact the potential of existing businesses within the city to grow. So maybe a business that's in a building that's like 50 to 60,000 square feet and they want to expand to 100,000 square feet or something. By not having those mid-sized buildings available that are newer with the higher ceilings and things like that, it may restrict their ability. They may have to move outside of the community. So that was a concern that was raised. The city reviewed industrial development standards and policies in other cities in the Inland Empire, including Rialto, Colton, Rancho Cucamonga, Beaumont, Jurupa Valley, Riverside, Pomona, Montclair, and Ontario. Several different standards were utilized to create the idea of a building envelope. And so that's what you can do within the allowable sizes on the lot. So, for example, in the table here, the Chino standards, we have a maximum lot coverage. This is for our general industrial land use category. We have a maximum lot coverage of 50%, so that means you can cover up to 50% of the lot with building area. Floor area ratio, so real quickly, the concept of a floor area ratio is how many square feet of developed area within a building relative to the square footage of the lot. So 0.6 would mean you could have 60% of the lot area as building area. And the difference between the lot coverage, 50%, and the floor area is 0.6, is that many industrial buildings do have a second floor or partial second floor. We call it a mezzanine, where they have office space. And so when you stack floors, then you double the space under. So that's where that concept of floor area ratio comes in. Minimum landscape coverage is 10%. So that's landscaped area on the lot, so that would be shrubs, grass, trees. You can't count parking area as part of that open space. We have the minimum lot area, so that's a minimum size lot you can create in the zone. Setbacks, so anytime the building fronts on a street, we require a minimum 25-foot setback. However, we require a 1-to-1 setback. So if the building height is 38 feet, we require a 38-foot setback. If it's 45, we require a 45-foot setback. So the minimum is 25, but as the building gets taller, we require it to be stepped back from the street on a 1-to-1 basis. And a maximum building height. So how high can we go? In Chino, our maximum building height is 75 feet. Now, if anybody had a 75-foot high building, it would have to be set back at least 75 feet. Generally, the building height doesn't apply so much to warehouse and distribution facilities because those are in the mid-40s. This mainly applies to things where we have specialized equipment, where we have cranes for forging, silos for storage, other things that generally are appurtenances to a main building, but they go taller just because the function of the manufacturing that's happening there. So that's representative of the city's development standards for that building envelope. In our analysis, we found that, yes, ma'am.
Could I ask you a quick question? Sure. Many of our larger buildings, the city has required screening of trucks, like it's sunken and landscapes higher. Does that fit anywhere in this, in the standards?
So that's what we would consider a performance standard. And performance standards are very unique to every city. So different cities have different things that they're concerned about with industrial development. So one of the things that's in Chino's performance standard is we don't want to see truck docks. And so we require, if the docks are going to be in proximity to a street, there has to be a combination of landscape, berming, screen wall, or any combination of those things, as well as a substantial setback to make sure that those are adequately screened. So that's not really a building envelope regulation, that's more of a performance standard. Okay. Another one of those performance standard items is required truck parking or trailer storage areas. The city currently has a standard that requires one trailer storage area for every 2 docks. And so that inadvertently constrains the building area because you have to provide yard area to store those trucks as well as having the area for the docks. So that does, in a way, kind of shrink the building envelope, or at least modify it a little bit, because the more docks you have, the more trailer parking you have to have. It increases the lot area that is needed for that trailer storage. So in our review of a lot of these other cities, we found that we're generally on pace or a little bit more restrictive. So a common floor area ratio that we found for this industrial land use designation is 0.75, which means you could get 3/4 of a square foot for every square foot of lot area. In Chino, you can only get 0.6 square feet for every square foot of lot area. So we're a little more restrictive. A lot of cities have no minimum landscape coverage area for industrial development. The city of Chino has 10%. Other cities do, and they require about 10%. So we're pretty consistent there. On the setbacks, the 1-for-1 is pretty standard. There's a lot of cities that require that 1-for-1, although there are several cities that have no setback requirements for industrial development. So they could build right up to the property line, even along a street frontage. But the city of Chino requires that minimum 25 feet. So if the council would like for these standards to be modified, staff would like direction on that, and we'd be happy to explore how we could fine-tune those things. Or look more at the performance standards, right? So we have performance standards on how the truck docks interface with the public view, but maybe it's determined we need more trailer storage, or maybe it's determined that we need to look at the docks based upon the square footage of the building, not just however many docks, could fit in a linear foot of building face. So different things like that. So we would definitely be open to looking at those items if the council wanted to give us that direction. So based on all of that, staff's recommendation was that there was not really a need to extend the moratorium because we just didn't feel there's enough vacant and underutilized industrial land that would create a significant amount of additional truck traffic. We're kind of, the plans for the industrial development in the city over time started in the mid-'80s, developed through the Chino Industrial Park South, or what we call Sub-Area 1 of the specific plan, and then now into the preserve. And so those areas are mostly developed, and so there are some, as we've shown, of the infill sites that are still there. We would want to explore changing some of these industrial land uses or zoning areas that are next to residential and other sensitive land uses with a comprehensive approach. So staff is going to be proposing to the council to kick off a comprehensive general plan update in the next year. And so that would be a really good time to look at these areas that are next to sensitive land uses and look at it comprehensively. Also, the time frame of going through that general plan amendment, if we looked at just one project just for this, we have to go through CEQA. There's a lot of things we have to go to, and it's kind of a longer time frame. And so it works out really well when looking at it with the general plan, because then we have to do all that stuff anyways. And so it's more economical, but also we can tie it to the circulation element. So we can tie it to the existing roadways and our analysis of the traffic on those roadways, and specifically model the truck traffic and what happens there, and any modifications that we make to the land uses, how that could positively or negatively impact the traffic over time. Through modeling. And so staff would propose, if we do want to look at that, we look at it with a comprehensive general plan update. We want to continue the enforcement of our truck traffic and other industrial development policies, but mainly with our new commercial enforcement program. We have our second commercial enforcement officer that started this week. And so we want to see the effects of additional enforcement as well to see if that kind of changes the dynamic with truck traffic within the city. And then also, if it pleases the council, to explore modifications to our current land use regulations and zoning code to look at these building envelope issues, design requirements, or performance standards that would hopefully make any of this infill industrial better neighbors to the adjacent properties. That concludes my report, and we're here to answer any questions you might have. Our city planner, Warren Morellian, and our transportation manager, Dennis Rawls, are here to also for specific questions. I would like to note that we did get input from some folks in the industrial development community. So the council did receive 3 letters discussing generally what I covered very briefly in my report concerning the industrial market today and land values and the potential impact of extending the moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Prior to council comments and questions of staff, I'm going to go ahead and open up the public hearing portion, although it's not a public hearing, but we do have 2 written requests to speak. The first is Dean, is it Washley? Washley.
Again, yeah, my name is Dean Washley, and I represent Golden Management. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on the industrial moratorium. We're the developers of a 3.57 acre site on the northwest corner of Philadelphia and East End. We'd like to request that our project be excluded from the moratorium if it's extended. We put this site into escrow in September of 2018. Upon doing so, we immediately went to the County of San Bernardino to see if we could develop the site. Upon doing so, we were informed that while the property was in the county, the city of Chino had a sewer line in East End and that we should speak with them about a potential annexation. We contacted the city and set up a meeting with Mike Hitz, the city planner. Mike informed us that the only way we would be allowed to connect to the sewer was if we were to annex our site into the city. He also informed us that our single building of approximately 80,000 square feet that we were proposing would most likely not be allowed, as the city wanted to keep all buildings in this area under 50,000 square feet. Mike also suggested we start with a preliminary application instead of a formal entitlement application. In October of 2018, we met with Sam Martinez of LAFCO to discuss the annexation process. We also learned that we would need to include at least 9 other parcels in our annexation because the city would not annex in an island. And there were parcels that were between us and the current city. In November of 2018, we were told by Mike Hitz that the city needed to have further discussions on the annexation because they needed to decide if further parcels should be included in the annexation. He also informed us the city was conducting an overall sphere annexation study, which was estimated to be completed in early of 2019. He suggested we wait on the results of that study. The study's results were delayed and delayed and delayed. After these delays, rather than waiting for the result, we informed Mike that we would go ahead and start the application process with the city. We submitted a preliminary application, and in April of 2019, we had our DRC meeting with the city of Chino. At this preliminary meeting, we submitted a 2-building project, one of 40,000 square feet and one of 32,000 square feet. At this meeting, we are told now that the city wanted buildings in this area no greater than 25,000 square feet, which meant a complete redesign. This was contradictory to what was allowable in the zoning and the allowable uses. It also meant that we had to start over and do a redesign for 3 buildings, which we did. After redesigning the project again, we had a second DRC meeting in February of 2020. One of the areas of concern came from the city was the fiscal impact of the proposed annexation. The developer was directed to complete a fiscal impact analysis, which was completed and submitted to the city for review. At the same time, we were directed to complete a traffic analysis to determine the traffic impact of our proposed site, which we completed and submitted to the city. In November of 2020, we submitted to the city our traffic study, our fiscal impact analysis, and CEQA documents. Several months after we submitted those studies, the city came back in June of 2021, requiring the developer to complete an extended off-site drainage analysis on the area on north end, on East End to the north, and then on Philadelphia, which we also completed. We have hired all the consultants necessary, which include an architect, a civil engineer, a soils engineer, traffic consultant, environmental consultant, fiscal analysis consultant, drainage study consultants, cultural consultants, greenhouse gas and noise consultants, and completed all of the reports necessary for processing entitlements for this project. We have spent to date $486,000 in entitlements and paid about $50,000 in city fees to review plans. From the date that we entered escrow in September of 2018 until now, we have not stopped processing to address city comments on our application. We have had countless emails, phone calls, meetings between ourselves and our consultants to address and comply with the city's DRC comments. We have done everything with direction from the city of Chino and their consultants. To come up now and to include our site in the moratorium after we have spent more than 3 years working on this project and spent a great amount of time and money is wrong. We would like to respectfully request that our site be excluded from this moratorium if it's extended. Thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walshall. Are there any questions from council? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. We may have some later.
No problem, thanks.
Thank you. The next is Mr. Bill Blankenship.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Bill Blankenship, representing NAIOP Inland Empire Chapter, which is the Commercial Industrial Industry Association. When I got here today, I submitted for the record a letter, and I believe it was also put in front of each of you. And we're here today to first thank you for the opportunity to work with your city staff. We had the opportunity to meet with them in person, and we've had a couple of email comments back and forth, as well as some phone conversations. And I believe from our perspective, that was helpful, and we want to thank you all for that opportunity. In addition to that, our letter simply states that we support city staff's conclusions that is in your staff report, and we continue to be opposed to moratoriums and certainly are opposed to the extension of a moratorium. We believe that the moratorium is very limited in scope and affects essentially 4 properties and maybe some additional properties that may come online at a later date through redevelopment, if you will. In addition to that, we certainly respect and would like to be part of a process where the city looks at their development standards. We've worked with many other jurisdictions throughout the region and have successfully helped them through many of our industry leaders, our experts in processing these type of facilities. So we certainly bring that to you and certainly offer that, and we would like to be part of your solution because we believe a strong Chino is a strong industry partner for us and our members. In addition to that, we believe that the existing truck routes, if they are continued to be enforced, will serve you well. We've seen that happen in other cities, and I noticed when I was at the meeting here back in October, your police chief made as part of his report, talked about the enforcement actions that they had happened, and I think that's a good way to address them, and certainly, addressing other concerns, if there are other concerns, through a general plan process seems to be like a good approach. So again, we're here as your partner. We want to work with you. We certainly urge you not to continue the moratorium. We think it's the wrong approach. I certainly articulated that at the last council meeting, and it's also here in our letter that we submitted for the record. So I'm available for any questions. Thank you for the opportunity to come up and speak today. And like I said, please ask if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Any questions of Mr. Blankenship? Okay, none at this time, thank you. Those are the only 2 written requests to speak. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to address the council on this item? Okay, seeing none, then we will turn it back to council comments. Now, I did open a public hearing, even though it's not a public hearing. Do I need to close it, or?
No need to close it. I
Okay.
think that was just a courtesy that
Okay.
you provided.
Thank you, Fred. Okay, council comments and discussion. Who wants to start? Mark?
Okay, I appreciate it, Nick, that you added to the presentation. I shared my concerns with the initial report that we received with the city manager. I believed it was very skewed, very one-sided. So I'm glad that you cleared that up in your verbal presentation. One of the things that I have as far as a question is, currently our vacancy rate for business parks is 2.2%, is what you said? Or is that for the industrial?
That's for all industrial buildings,
Okay,
so of any size.
okay. Do we know exactly what it is for business parks?
I do not. I don't know if there are industry numbers that break it down to that level, but we can do that research to find out.
Okay, and then when we talk about, let's say, business parks, how big of buildings, what's the maximum that usually goes into like a business park?
So we have quite a variety, actually, in the city's areas that are designated business park. We have anything from multi-tenant buildings, so where you'd have like 5 or 6 buildings that maybe have 4 or 5 to up to 10 or 12 individual suites, almost like storefronts, except they have a roll-up door in the back. Sometimes that's called flex industrial. We've got that format all the way to more of a master plan like the one off of Euclid and Edison, where that has some buildings that are over 80,000 square feet, all the way down to buildings that are 12,000 square feet. So there's really a wide variety. From our development code standpoint, our code says that in the business park zone, you generally can't have buildings larger than 25,000 square feet. So that's really the way that we would define it, is to say, is it first in an area that's zoned for business park, and secondly, what are the building sizes, and do they exceed 25,000 square feet? Now, you are allowed to exceed 25,000 square feet with a conditional use permit. So that's often happened in these larger master planned industrial parks, like off of Kimball Avenue, Kimball between Flight and Hellman, or at Euclid and Edison, where you have kind of a combination. You have some a little bit larger buildings, not huge, not 400,000 or 500,000 square feet, but a little bit on the larger size, and then a bunch of the smaller buildings. So it's more of a generalized term. I don't know that there's a specific definition, but we can go off of our zoning code, which says 25,000 square feet or less, that's a business park.
And then one of the things I had some questions about, for example, Mr. Marshall submitted this letter to us. And if we look at the numbers that you submitted in your presentation here, where it says that Chino Monte Vista has 3 acres, and you're looking at a building potentially at 65,000 square feet, 65,300 is what the report says.
Mm-hmm.
And he's on 3.5 acres. But he's saying that he was told that the first time was that he couldn't build anything over 50,000 square feet. And then the second time he was told that nothing was to be built over 25,000 square feet. What was the reason for the change there as opposed to what you're showing as an example here in your report?
So the industrial model, so like in a light industrial land use designation, the 50,000 square foot is the limit. However, you can exceed the 50,000 square feet with a special conditional use permit. So in our analysis, what we're looking at is we're trying to capture a worst case scenario. Say someone came in and said, I don't care if it's a CUP or not, I want to build the largest building I can on the lot. So that's assuming that they would be able to get approval by the Planning Commission of the CUP to exceed the 50,000 square feet. That was what our analysis was based on. Now, in terms of this particular project, staff has been sensitive to the comments from both the Planning Commission and the City Council concerning industrial development projects today, and knowing that this area, there is a residential neighborhood on the other side of East End Avenue. We're trying to respond to that, and also trying to predict where the Planning Commission would be coming from in their decision-making, as well as the council, because it is an annexation. It's a legislative action. And so in trying to advise the applicant, we felt that if they built smaller buildings, that they would probably be more viewed as more compatible with adjacent uses, and potentially be looked upon more favorably by the decision makers.
But on your report here, it also says that on East End in Philadelphia, the 6 acre, they're looking at a potential 130,700 square foot building for 1B. For 1C, East End Philadelphia on the opposite side is 196,000 square feet on a 9 acre parcel. So those two you're not trying to break down into smaller lots?
So those, again, this, for purposes of this study, we were trying to get a worst-case scenario. So we were trying to look at one big building, how much traffic, how much specifically truck traffic would that generate? But we don't know exactly what would be developed there until we actually get a full proposal on those items. So
So if somebody came to you, let's say a developer came to you and said, hey, I want to develop this 9-acre parcel or this 6-acre parcel. Let's take the smaller one, the 6-acre parcel. Are you going to tell them also there that we don't want buildings over 25,000 square feet, or are we going to go with the bigger sizes there?
well, in our analysis, we would probably do something similar and recommend that they go with smaller buildings in that location. Just based upon input that we've received from the Planning Commission and City Council in more recent times, so. That would be our advice. Now, they can apply for one large building. They would be able to do that, to seek entitlements for that. But a lot of times the applicant wants to know from staff, what do you think, if I go through all this work to make this proposal, would it get approved? And so we have to say, well, this is what we're hearing recently from, we've taken projects to Planning Commission and City Council. They're concerned about the compatibility, especially with residential in the area. We recommend that you would limit the building sizes, limit the docks, because we don't want to encourage distribution type facilities. If they had a specific user that wanted to come in that we knew that manufactured a particular item, and we had a really good sense of what the truck trips actually were, that could change the dynamic of the conversation as well, because they could be a business that says, well, we work on these things and we have essentially one truck trip a day. And so but we need a large area in the building because we have gantries and cranes and we do other things, then that would be part of the discussion as well. So a lot of times when we call it speculation industrial, or spec industrial, where they're just coming in and saying, I don't know who my end user is yet, but I know I want to build a building here. The industry is usually trying to kind of maximize the leasable area, right? So that speaks to building a larger building, as well as utilizing as many dock doors as possible. So it's the potential to meet the needs of kind of any user or the average user out there. But if someone came to us and it was a specific business that wanted to build something, they wanted to expand, and they needed a certain building of a certain size, but we knew what their traffic generation was. They could tell us, we have 80 employees, so we need this much parking. We only have 3 trucks, so we don't need that much. Then that would change the dynamic of the conversation in terms of building size.
But, I mean, my understanding is we have developers that come in and request to build buildings, but when they build the buildings, they don't know who's gonna go in yet. So how do we make that determination? If they build the buildings and then they lease them and then the businesses come in after, how would we speculate how many parking and all that other stuff? Because my understanding is they get land, they develop it, they build the buildings, and then afterwards they lease them. So I mean, they don't even know who they're getting in there.
And that's under the spec scenario. We do from time to time have specific businesses that want to build a building for themselves. And that's where we have the advanced knowledge of how many employees they have and what their operating characteristics are. But that's not, maybe that's 10 or 20%. A lot of what we have is the spec, and we do have speculative standards. So we have general standards that apply when we don't know who the end user is. We have parking standards and the trailer storage standards, landscape, all those types of things that apply when the end user is unknown. And so what we try to do with that is capture a multitude of users. But also under that scenario, the developer's usually trying to maximize the building size. So again, that's where the interplay is. We say, okay, well, maybe you could build a 250,000 square foot building, but a 250,000 square foot building in this location with 40 docks is more than likely going to be a distribution type facility. If we don't feel that that would be appropriate in that area because of the either adjacent land uses or adjacent roadways, then we would advise the applicant that, well, this may be allowed under the zoning. We're not sure that it's a right fit, and instead maybe you should explore doing 2 buildings or 3 buildings, limiting the docks, therefore constraining who the end users could be. But that's a subjective analysis.
So if I can
we undergo.
interrupt, it's kind of, you try to plan for worst-case scenario, trying to use a crystal ball, looking into the future and trying to predict what the best fit would be for the unknown tenant coming in.
That's correct, yes.
Good luck with that. Good Lord.
It's challenging.
Well, yeah, and you don't have, and then you take the pulse of the Planning Commission and the council to try to figure out what our desires would be, couple that with worst-case scenario, what's neighboring around it, right?
And what kind of input we receive from the adjacent land owners. So when we're in a total industrial district, usually we get no input or we get positive input. We get business owners that say, oh, hey, thank goodness, finally that lot's being developed. But when we're on the edge and we have adjacent users that are generally, it's residential areas, then we get the opposite kind of input. It's almost like that's been a field for a long time. I like the field. I don't know what I'm going to get with a industrial building. Change makes us nervous. And so therefore, they come and provide input at the planning commission. We usually have a neighborhood meeting, and then we go to the planning commission hearing. And so the planning commission is sensitive to the adjacent property owners' concerns. And so in part of the development process, staff tries to anticipate that. What do we know about who lives in the area? If they've expressed concerns in the past about truck traffic or things like that. And then we factor that. We try to factor that in. We talk with the applicant. We said, this is the feedback we think we're going to get. How can you respond to that ahead of time? Are there design things? Can we face the building a different way? Can we put the entrances and exits in different locations where we think they'll be less impactful? And so we try to do that all as part of that development process. But all of those items that's very subjective, and that's just based upon staff's experience and working with the community.
Well, to go back to, so for example, all these areas that we're talking about are zone industrial. So if somebody comes in with an application and says, I want to build an industrial building here, it doesn't come to the city council. It goes to the planning commission.
That's correct.
And the planning commission is the one that approves it, and we never see it as a council.
That's correct.
So one of the reasons that we asked for this.
But the council, the code does allow you to take a planning commission application. The council can review it.
Yeah, but that's only if somebody briefs us on it and tells us, hey, this is what was approved. Otherwise, we would have to attend the meeting ourselves. So one of the reasons that we asked for this moratorium was because there was a building, 300,000 square feet, that was approved off of Yorba Avenue, which butted up right against residential. I don't believe anybody ever told them, hey, I don't think this is a proper fit for this area. The Planning Commission approved it. Only reason we got to see it was because there needed to be a zoning change. So although you're telling us that this is the thing that they do and that the suggestions are made and that it's not that, here was a building that was 300,000 square feet that was put on a 2-lane road, one going north, one going south, that butted up right next to residentials, and we allowed them to put the biggest building that they could possibly put in there. So that was the reason for the moratorium, to give us an opportunity to look at what we have right now that's still available, to see if there is a need to change the zoning. And I'm not talking about the stuff that's on the south part of the city that's completely zoned for commercial or industrial, I should say, because we already know that that's what it's zoned for. We're talking about property that is right up against residential, property that is in the infill inside currently built-out areas of our city. And that's what we wanted to look at. So there's not a whole lot of parcels there. So when I look at what you put, about 196,000 square feet or a 65,000 square foot building, that's what I'm thinking is going to get built there, because if I look at what happened the last time, the maximum building that was available to be built on a land like this was built. So that's my only concern. And, you know, when we talk about maybe doing some additional setbacks, I'm open to that. You know, I'm not opposed to that. But my only concern that I have is, okay, let's say we don't have an moratorium and we release that, and then all of a sudden somebody puts in an application and they submit to build on this property, and then all of a sudden there is no moratorium and they put in this application. Does that open up the city for liability? And if it does, that's something that would obviously I'd be interested in knowing, because I don't want to move the city into a direction and then midway while this person's going through an application process, we then change it on them. Because one, I don't think it's fair, and two, I don't want to open us up to liability. Can you address any of those?
I'm happy to address that if I.
Well, how about with Nick, the 300,000 square foot building that went next in that area, did you guys ask them, or did you guys come to them and say, hey, can we build a smaller building? It won't fit in this area like you're telling us?
So during that application review, we did discuss the potential for doing some smaller buildings, because there are smaller buildings in the area. The residential properties to the north are non-conforming properties. So from a planning standpoint, we acknowledge that the houses are there and they're legal. However, the general plan anticipates that they would be there would not be residential there in the future. So they are houses, but they're on land that's zoned for industrial. And so from a long-term planning standpoint, we look at that non-conforming use as something that's gonna change out over time. So it's not exactly the same as if there's a residential neighborhood where the land is designated for residential. And so the plan contemplates that's gonna be residential into the future versus it being a legal non-conforming land use. But the applicant did assert, along with the property owner, the school district, that the only way that the project would work for them and to meet the objectives of the school district is if they were entitled for the large building. And so they decided to pursue the one large building. It did meet all of the requirements of our code, and so therefore staff took that application forward.
So if any of these other properties decided to say, hey, we just want the bigger building, I mean, really, we can't do anything about it.
We can't, in terms of if it meets all of our standards, and there's no discretion on the building size. So in the M2 zone, there is no building size limitation, unlike in the M1 zone, which has a 50,000 square foot building size limitation. And there's discretion there for the Planning Commission to say yes or no on any building larger than 50,000 square feet. But in the general industrial, there is no building size limitation.
Now, the smaller lots, the ones that actually butt up next to houses, are those zoned for M1 or for M2?
So the sample sites that we have the sites 2 and 3 are zoned M1. So those would be the 50,000 square foot. But the M2 sites, there's no limitation.
I don't have any more questions right now.
Chris, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mayor. I first want to address the gentleman that came up and read the letter that I've seen. It seems like he's gone through a lot of, his staff, along with our staff, have gone through a lot of time and a lot of expense to bring forward an application. So I appreciate you coming in and offering your comments tonight and sending this letter to us. Nick, I think one of the things that's a little disappointing for me in this report is, which I've already conveyed to the city manager, is that it's mostly just the opinion of the development community, and and obviously some of the opinions of our staff. I think one of the things I see missing from this report is just some of the concerns from our residents, and what impact in developing this or annexing this area could mean to the quality of life and to their neighborhood specifically. I too had the same question about when you said we had 2% industrial vacancy in the community. It would be nice in this report to know the difference between the M1, the M2, and the ones that have the truck docks and the ones that don't. Just I think it would have helped us to make a better decision or be more informed as part of the staff report. And I think the issue here is, like the mayor pointed out, you're planning for the worst case scenario, and the fact of the matter is we're going to encourage the applicant, just like we did with the last project that came through that kind of spawned some of this. But the fact of the matter is, if this is the maximum allowable building that's on there, we're going to have plenty of applicants in this economy because of inflation say, no, that's exactly what I want to put on there. Because let's face it, the commercial space has gone, has almost tripled in the past couple of years. So there's going to be more of a push for them to get the maximum benefit from their rent from the person that is there, right? So we know from an economic driver perspective that after the developer develops that and then they rent it, based off the size, that it's going to maximize their gain, particularly on the footprint of the building. So I do think that's also driving why some of these developers would like that, and it's from that perspective. Because I do see this similar as to what caused us to begin as to on Yorba, where we had a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but a few people there, I shouldn't say a lot, who I don't think understood that project, even when we did some of the outreach. As well as the bottom line is, these are the numbers we're going to have to live with if we have an applicant that says that they want it after it goes through the planning commission. So I think that is the concern of the council. I guess I would have the same question as the Mayor Pro Tem did. How do we implement the suggestions to get both? How do we get a good development project in these areas because we want it and we need it? It helps us. But how do we get the project that also is the balance to our residents and our community that lives there, so as we don't encroach traffic-wise upon the quality of their life that they enjoy up there presently? And that's my concern, because when we go out and look at these, traffic impact studies, while I respect this process immensely, I have never seen one come back, whether it be a development on the north side of town or, California Institute for Men or Rafa Yorba. They all come back that we can mitigate every concern, every single time. And I have not seen one come back and say, hey, no, I just don't think traffic-wise that this isn't going to be a good fit here. And, to me, it's more about, the problems that we already have in portions of town with the trucks. And once we go to develop this area out, since there's so few of them, putting that so closely to some of our residents there who've lived over there for a long period of time. That's a well-established neighborhood, with us also talking about annexing those areas. And even when we go to annex an area, we reach out to those members and say, hey, here's what we're looking at. We've had a history of doing that. Now, I know that also comes at a later time during the process with more public input, right? But sometimes by then, I think once that ball gets rolling, particularly in this case, it's almost too late. At least sometimes it feels that way. So how do we do things to get the best of both is my question. And, should we do some of these things? Can we be, liable in the future, for some of these suggestions?
Paul, any questions or comments?
Couple of comments. Nick, out of all the land we have north of Schaefer that's zone M1 and M2,
Well, bring your microphone over.
sorry.
It was on.
Okay. Nick, out of all the land we have north of Schaefer, what would you estimate this 45 acres we're looking at here? What percentage would you say? Large percent?
No, it's relatively small. Part of the complicating factor is that Site 1 it's in the county currently, so if we look at the area that's in the county, that's also designated for industrial, we'd probably be saying, I don't know, maybe less than 20%.
Thank you. Well, I think basically our moratorium here is to take a look at the building future for these zonings. And I believe that your staff report made it abundantly clear that this is the best use for this land. If we go to lower grade industrial or business parks, we're going to have far more vehicle trips, plus far more truck trips. And I'm thinking of if these businesses are small businesses, they might use the van type of trucks or the little box trucks, and they might be running all over the streets, not just the truck routes. And another comment is the street size of this street is the same street that we're using throughout Chino, with all of our truck routes. I mean, all of our business projects are on same size street widths, which works for those streets, those projects. So it should work for this project too. So I'm thinking we're using the best use for the land right now, and we should not continue the moratorium. Thanks.
Chris, any comments, questions? Okay. Obviously, this is a controversial item, and council members have valid concerns, of course, about our community and truck traffic and all of that. I look at it a little bit differently. From a 30,000-foot view, obviously we have to be sensitive to residents and what's happening. But when you get down to these particular items, and I've driven all of them, the one on East End Avenue, everything on the west side of East End Avenue is industrial, everything. There's a very, very nice development on the east side, Sullivan Ranch, and they have lived across the street from truck parking, heavy traffic, and to my knowledge, we have never, ever heard any complaints from those residents. So to do anything other than what it's currently zoned, for me, makes no sense. Because if you look north of Philadelphia or south of Philadelphia, it's all industrial buildings, all of it. And it's in the county, so it's kind of out of our control if they want to apply to the county and go that way, except for sewer, of course. But, we've have experience in the past with dealing with the county, and they're not exactly cooperative. So that whole area north, north of Phillips would be sphere of influence of Pomona or Montclair? I think Pomona, right?
So, so north of Phillips, there's the county line. So essentially,
County.
at Reservoir, becomes LA County, becomes Pomona, and then on the east side of that is Montclair Sphere.
Well, that whole area is all a mixture of different manufacturing and industrial, everything around there, except for the Sullivan Ranch and some of the houses in the county. So it doesn't make any sense to me to change that, so I would not be in favor of changing the zoning on East End Avenue. Whether we want to put building standards and ask for smaller buildings, I think that has to be an economic decision. I don't think people buy pieces of land thinking that they're not going to be able to make a profit. So I'm sure that people that invest in land and invest in buildings have done their own economic analysis as to what is going to be profitable and what's in demand. You know, I think they can foresee that better than we can, because we're not in that business. But I would be willing to look at standards. As far as the other pieces that we're looking at, item number 2 is that teensy-tiny little triangle that has a couple of houses right there. Why anybody would want to live with the railroad tracks right directly in their backyard, I have no idea. So for me, those homes, once the people decide to move or whatever, that won't be residential again, and it's not zoned residential. It will transition over, and I would guess because those homes are on small lots, whoever decides to develop that would probably acquire all of the property from Monte Vista West, I'm assuming. So to change that to a business park, that little teensy triangle, I just don't see that as being practical. It just isn't practical, and I don't think it would ever develop. Now, somebody might come in and say, you know, maybe it would be worthwhile looking at that whole piece of property there on Monte Vista, that 3 acres, which I think includes the Red Barn or whatever it's called.
Yes, it does.
I think somebody, I would guess, not being an expert in it, I would guess somebody would look at that whole piece and see whether it would be economically feasible to acquire everything from Monte Vista West to do a project there. But to change the zoning to a business park, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And kind of my same analysis on item number 3. We have what used to be West LA Milling. I don't know what it's called now, but there's the railroad track that runs right through there and the railroad spur. That's when we were going through our general plan years ago, the property next to that railroad spur was very desirable property for a manufacturer because they could load right onto a railroad car, right? So for me, I don't think I could support changing the land that's currently manufacturing to a business park that's right next to a railroad spur that's between Chino Avenue and West LA Milling, you know, that acreage right there. So again, that doesn't make too much sense to me. I understand the concern that we have on Yorba, but again, the difficulty for me is that property has been zoned that way for as long as I can remember. Years and years and years and years and years. I get the concern with what the school district did. I understand. But the homes that are north of that are non-conforming use. They will not stay homes as those get older and the people decide to move. Those are going to change into industrial. They're not going to stay houses. I don't know. I just, you know, I don't mean to disrespect my fellow councilmen, and I understand your concerns, but we do have industrial parks right across the street from housing, like south of Chino Avenue, down by Schaefer Oaks. Help me, Nick. What are, you know, were you on the east side of the street are all homes, on the west side's all industrial?
Yeah, so near Benson Avenue, and then
Yes.
on the south side of Schaefer.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
to Oaks.
And I've been on the council for 100 years, it feels like, and I don't ever recall any complaints from those neighborhoods. In fact, in talking to people, they kind of like the fact that on the weekends it's quiet. You know, because most of those businesses are shut down on the weekends, unless, of course, they're using some for churches. But I think, again, not to be disrespectful for my fellow council people, but what we've done in the past, mixing residential with industrial, scaling down in sizes, I think the planning commission and the staff have done a good job in mixing these uses. Yes, we have terrible truck traffic problems, as does everybody in the Inland Empire. I'm hoping that with our added enforcement, especially the truck drivers that are violating Chino Avenue and causing problems there, I'm hoping that will curtail, lessen a great deal, and then finally stop, because I know it does cause a lot of problems. But changing the zoning on these 4 locations is not going to impact what's happening now, in my personal opinion. Now, I will share that on item number 4, because of what's going in on north of item number 4, I think we do need to put some restrictions, forcing trucks to go south all the way down to Edison, not allowing them to turn onto Chino Avenue, because until that property develops, a right-hand turn going south, onto Schaefer, they're gonna have to cross over the line on Chino Avenue, my personal opinion, to get big trucks around that corner. So I would say one of the standards that we could do is force them to go south all the way down to Edison. But kind of, that particular property on the corner is a mess. When you look at the aerial and when you drive through, the portion that is north of where the animals are right now, it's all different kinds of trucks and storage and all of that. A development would clean that up. It would help finish Yorba, and it would finish that corner right there. So it's, maybe smaller buildings would work, maybe not. I know that's not much help, and I apologize for that, but those are my comments.
And to piggyback off of my question, on Chino Avenue across the street from the houses, I know what she's talking about. How big are those buildings?
So I don't have that information readily available.
Is there any 300,000 square foot buildings?
Not on Chino Avenue.
About 196,000?
That I would have to look at, because there are some larger or mid-sized buildings along there, but I would have to look at the building sizes on there.
And
answer
just
that.
so we, when we did this moratorium, I never thought that we were going to tap into our sphere of influence. I only thought we were going to be covering the city of Chino. So item number 1, up until I met with you guys last week, I never expected this item to even be on here. It's confusing to me that it's on here, and that the size of the buildings are so big. And then I have a developer here who has a piece of property in that area, but has been told that, or at least for the past 3 years, has been jumping through hoops, it seems like, and he's been told smaller buildings. So I'm not sure. To him, we're telling him smaller buildings. Here, we're saying bigger buildings are okay. So I'm not understanding that. That's my confusion. I understand the mayor's point. Unfortunately, my parents didn't have a whole lot of money, so I actually grew up behind some railroad tracks that were actually behind our house. And when they went by, shook our house constantly. And after a while, we got used to it. But that neighborhood's still there. It's unfortunate, but there's some folks that are in not the greatest financial need, and they're going to remain in those houses. And I don't think that when people get older, they're going to move out. I think they're going to pass them down to their kids. And I think those communities they're here to stay. I don't think that, I can't see especially when the older houses like that and they're paid off, I see kids moving into those houses and keeping them because, one, it's a financial, financially it makes sense for them just to take over their parents' homes. And I understand that's not zoned for that, but I mean, I don't know if that's going to go away. I don't know if a developer will buy one house with the hope that in 10 years some other house goes up and then hopefully another house goes up. I don't know if that's feasible. But you know, I'm not opposed to looking at the zoning and like I said, if you came to me and I look at and I'm going to be honest with you, I think these numbers are way off as far as business parks, because I can tell you right now, I'll go into the Spectrum Business Park, which is located just north of the Spectrum, and that's a pretty big business park. There is no way in the world that they have 243,900 cars going through there. There's no way. I've never seen that as a busy business park that has cars waiting to get out of there or making an impact on Schaefer or any of those streets. But I think we're looking at these and we're given the worst case scenario for cars, for business parks, and the best case scenario for trucks. And that's concerning to me because, and that was one of the things that I did point out to the city manager, that it seemed extremely one-sided. Because I don't think there's any business parks that we have in our area that produce this many cars. I just don't see it. I mean, I go in, and if you look at item number 4, all up and down Schaefer Avenue, that's all business parks. It's completely business parks, and if you go east of it, or I should say west of it, those are business parks. And I take my car there, and that's an body or automotive mechanic, and his parking lot's full of cars, and there's no way in the world that business park comes up. Even with his business being fixing cars, there's no way in the world that many vehicles come in and out of there on a regular basis. It's just, and the other businesses that are located there. In fact, I would love to see a study done on our business parks to adequately show us the amount of cars that come in and out of there, because these numbers right here that we're using, they're completely, in my opinion, inflated and don't properly show the amount of flow of vehicles that come through there. But like the mayor, like Councilwoman Comstock said, where do we go from here? And I think I never went back to the city attorney, but so let's say we lift this, an application comes in, and we decide that setbacks are going to be different. Does that open us up to liability?
I'm happy to respond, Mayor. Essentially, an application doesn't gain any vesting or any rights until the application's deemed complete. So by somebody submitting an application and your ordinance changes in the meantime, it's not until that application is deemed complete by your planning department that potential legal issues could come up. If let's say the city council wants to adopt some different standards in your ordinance, you could do that, you know, as soon as this council directs, and staff can present the options. And once you adopt that ordinance, it becomes your new standard. And if an application comes in and before that time, up until the point it's deemed complete, there's really no rights gained, so the city would not face any liability. I will back up and say that based on some of the concerns I've heard, I think there are a few options if the council did want to address some of the standards. One is just to create a new zone that has more limitations than your current M2 zoning that would apply just to the particular area you're studying, you know, north of Schaefer, et cetera. Another, and this is part of, I think, what Nick is explaining, that even though staff can recommend to an applicant that they pare down the size of a building, ultimately, if your code allows a certain, you know, setback, floor area ratio, et cetera, an applicant can nevertheless say, well, you know, your code allows all of this, so thank you for the input, but I'm going to present this to the Planning Commission. So perhaps a standard that says anything above X size or X setback would require the discretion of the Planning Commission. So that, for example, your floor area ratio is 0.6. If you want to exceed that, or let's say you want to make it more conservative, and if an applicant wishes to exceed that, they could seek some discretionary action. That may be, I think those are the two options you'd have, to change the standards or to create a whole new zone that applies to that particular area.
Okay. Is it possible to get Mr. Marshall to come back up?
Yes.
So, Mr. Marshall, were you suggested to make your building smaller, or were you just told?
No, it wasn't a suggestion.
Okay. What were you told?
It was a requirement.
Okay.
If it was just a suggestion, we would have stayed with an 80,000 square foot building. Or the first DRC meeting, we presented a 40 and a 32, and we were told that it would not be supported by planning commission and that we had to reduce the size of 25,000 square foot building max.
Okay.
So what do you have planned right now? 325?
3 buildings that are all under 25,000 square feet.
Okay. Any other questions?
No.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mayor, can I make a couple additional
Yes,
comments?
Karen.
Mayor, I'm with you. I think the intent of this council is good. I think our hearts are in the right place. I think while we may have some opposing perspectives on things, I don't think any of it is ill-willed. And I agree with you, Mayor. But I do think Sullivan's Ranch is in the county area. So we may not get complaints from them about, truck traffic or other things, across the street over there at Scott's Dairy, like we may get from our residents if they were to call for a service complaint. The other thing is, I see your point. I just had to clarify for some of my constituency out there, I'm not anti-capitalistic. I can totally get that a property, in fact, I am a capitalist, I enjoy it. But I just don't want people to think that when somebody buys a piece of property, that I would not expect for them to get the full benefit off their return. I think more of my comments there were generated at, we don't know always what's going to come in there. And as the property owner, which they have a right to get the maximum benefit of their commercial real estate, sometimes that also brings with it truck traffic or other things, other issues to the community that I think sometimes are just disparate sometimes, based off of, this has come up in other projects like with FedEx or other things where we're getting great improvements, but in the long term, if we don't know what's going there, we don't always have control over what sales tax revenue we could get in some of those places, the benefit of those things in the long term. And that's some of the things I see that we've done. So where that weighs out for me, and I spoke to the city manager with this, is I look at some of the things we're doing in some of these areas, and this is great. This is development, and it's a little easier to do because it's a one and done with the DIFEs and different things. And sometimes I just wish also we would complement it with the economic driver portion of it, which is probably another conversation for another time. But to bring that full circle, how can this council today, figure out, like I said earlier, Nick, with setbacks or some of these, you talked about good neighbor policies and different things. Those are some of the things we talked about with you in the infrastructure committee. What is it that this staff can bring back to us to help us with setbacks or different things? And Nick, I realized that you said, hey, in some areas we're more restrictive than other communities east of us. And Nick, I think that's a good thing. One of the things that people talk about in living in Chino is they want to preserve our quality of life, the way our buildings look. I don't want to compare us to some of those other communities that presently have these moratoriums and their residents, and some people are fighting for this exact reason. And last, I would just say, when you start talking about putting truck traffic in some of these areas, if you don't think truck traffic is different than just cars or different types of traffic, it is. And if you're on the 60 freeway going eastbound at about 9 o'clock in the morning or about 5 o'clock at night, it's a wall of trucks. Sometimes I can't even get off at Gary or Highway 71. I have to fight trucks to get in there. So I would rather drive next to cars in places, sometimes in certain areas of town, than trucks. Because, when you're motoring around town, particularly in and out of your neighborhood, it's more challenging. And if I'm not mistaken, I want to say that one or two of those houses on Yorba, I think is owned by one of the business owner's family. one of the engineering places there. So this is a really tough decision. I respect, everything that everybody in this council has said tonight, and I'm not trying to sound, I hope I don't sound contentious, not just to my fellow council members, but I'm also trying to look out for our community as everybody else is here. And I don't want to sound contentious to the development community, because we certainly appreciate all you do for us, here in the city of Chino. So thank you, Mayor.
Well, I appreciate your comments, Karen, and I think anybody that has heard us struggle with this understands that none of us are trying to hurt anybody. We're just trying to figure out what's best for our community and moving forward. For me, I try to look, 20, 25 years into the future, and what do we want to see? But boy, I'll tell you, talk about reality. Today, I had a meeting over off of Grove, and as I traveled eastbound on the 60 freeway, the traffic westbound was almost completely stopped, and it was almost solid trucks. It was amazing. It was at least, in some areas, 3 of the lanes were solid trucks traveling that way, west. It was a surprise. So coming back from my meeting, I didn't even try to use the freeway. I used surface streets. So a reality is our 200 or 300, 400, whatever amount of numbers that is this decision tonight is going to impact is a drop in the bucket compared to what we're surrounded by. I mean, it's shocking. They've used the 60 freeway as the main thoroughfare for trucks. And whether we like it or not, it cuts right through our community, and we're impacted. That's horrible, I understand. Some of the questions that we have tonight that various members up here have spoken about, and questions that we've asked can't be answered. Nobody has a crystal ball, least of all staff. I mean, I guess trying to figure out what would be acceptable to the Planning Commission and the council, trying to drive our business community to present something that staff thinks will accept and not reject, or the Planning Commission, puts them in a precarious position. Yeah, technically, on the Monte Vista and Chino Avenue property, those 3 acres, a 52,000 square foot building could be built. Will it? I doubt it. I doubt it seriously. Would a 156,000 square foot building be built? I guess not. But if staff didn't present to us the worst case scenario, then we'd beat them up for trying to dumb things down and present something that was palatable. You know what I mean? So we need to look at worst case scenarios. So Karen, I'm going to take kind of the opposite stance of you two when it comes to presenting these numbers. They're industry standards, and we don't have a crystal ball. And I agree with you. I don't think these numbers of cars come out of what you referred to as business parks, but I think a lot of that's light industrial. The car working people and stuff. I don't think those are in business parks, are they? The auto industry?
Yeah, they are. There's several different mechanic shops in the city that are in what we would consider a business park, where it's many of them are in a multi-tenant type of configuration. So they have like maybe 2 or 3 suites. They have roll-up doors or grade doors at the back, and there's a combination of uses. But because it's that business park, can also be called very light industrial, if you want to put a different word to it. So it allows industrial uses, but only at the kind of the lightest level. So it's still, mechanic shops are allowed, but auto body is not because of the noise. Oh, okay. So it's that kind of thing. A lot of times for these types of businesses, the lease rates are more economical than if they went into a place that was zoned for retail. And so that's why you often see those types of businesses there, or other car-based, like car stereo, auto tinting. Sometimes you have the alterations or embroidery, those types of things that maybe they don't have the same foot traffic as retail, but they need more space to do their business and not impact a bunch of neighbors.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Anyway, I'll just wrap up. We don't have a crystal ball, you don't have a crystal ball, we don't know exactly what's gonna come into these places. But for me, trying to look at fairness over what zoning has been for years and years and years and years, and then flipping it and changing it at the last minute is really rather unfair when there's already been plans that have been presented. That's difficult for me to swallow and rip the rug out from out of someone's, out from underneath someone's feet. Yeah, Karen, go ahead.
Mayor, I'm still struggling with how to potentially vote on this without maybe us talking more as a council, some of the suggestions that Nick had to us about different design standards, or what he called envelope standards, building envelope standards, and performance standards, Nick, that could help us potentially manage some of these things or make it more palatable to some of these areas moving forward. So could we have a discussion about some of the suggestions that Nick made?
Well, let me ask staff and our attorney a question. We're looking at, if we don't look at the county area, okay, if we just look at the three, you can't, without some kind of, I'll say prejudice, you can't really select out a couple of spots and treat them differently than anybody else, can you?
That's correct. You can't just pick lots and say, I want to create a new standard for just these 3 lots. But, that's why this moratorium's broad. It applies to all properties north of Schaefer. You could, and that's why I also suggested you could create a whole new category of zoning designation that applies just to the north of the city that has some more restrictive standards, or you could revise your current standards for M2 properties that say, should you wish to exceed this setback, then it requires discretion of the planning commission. So that way you build it in, and that would apply citywide, obviously, but it wouldn't take away the rights of the property owners to seek the full amount. It would just explain that that is not an absolute right. It's within the discretion of the planning commission.
Mayor, maybe another suggestion I have is what the city manager talked about, not just exploring what the city attorney just suggested, but the city manager mentioned that on these development decisions that ordinance allows for them to come to the council as well. I think the majority of them that are approved by the planning commission, I think we think are great projects because the planning commission has a job, but every now and then one does come up where we have our constituency contact us. And is that something we consider changing? It could go on the consent calendar or no?
I wouldn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't, because I think that adds just one more step for somebody trying to accomplish something. But I think, like our city manager brought up, if I didn't misunderstand you, if there is an exception, we can request that it come to us.
I see what you're saying.
But to require everything to come to the council, I think would just
Give a
bog it-
quagmire?
Well, it would bog it down even more.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And then you never know what's gonna come up, and I think that would just throw everything into a tailspin.
Can I just add a couple of things real quick? Clearly, there's been a policy changes that deals with industrial, and you've gotten the attention, and not only staff, but the industrial community. I think they hear, we, meaning staff and the industrial community, understands that we're not interested in building to the maximum as possible. We keep referring to this project, the school district project. That was the first action that the council has taken where they expressed this concern. But to realize that years prior to that, the policy has been, as staff has implemented it, and we've accepted these buildings, and the market has built large buildings. But it wasn't until this specific project that the new council has been very explicit that we do not want to be building to the maximum. We want to be much more sensitive to the size of the buildings and everything that goes with it. So you've gotten that attention. I think that helps that you've communicated that, because when they go before the planning commission, there's an understanding in the planning commission. They'll be advised as to what this discussion's been about. But staff is advocating for the smaller buildings at the end of the day because they've listened to this input. But prior to that project, there was never given that direction. And we hear you loud and clear. I do think that we can be very explicit that when the Planning Commission approves any type of industrial building, we will certainly give note. I can just give notice. I can do that administratively, give the council notice. And if there is any concern, the council, per the code, allows you to review that specific item. I'm also comfortable with you establish, a building size and require a conditional use permit. That's not, by having a conditional use permit, you're basically requiring the developer to mitigate everything that's associated with that development. And if you're not comfortable with it, you can review it and provide comment on that. So I think there's ways we can work within the existing code. I don't have any problems sitting down with a subcommittee to further review these standards. But we've been given clear direction, and I think what you've communicated, not only to staff, but to the industrial community, that this is what we want. We're not interested in building to the max. We want to be extremely sensitive to its surroundings.
Well, I think the staff has been doing that, though. If, we heard from the applicant this evening.
That's correct.
Staff did do that way before the building on Yorba, trying to be sensitive to the fact that the council was tired of the great big boxes. And that was going back 4 years ago, that staff, 3 years ago, that staff was requesting smaller buildings because the old council had verbally said, we're tired of the great big boxes. So that didn't just start with Yorba, Matt. But that project came forward because it was what penciled out so the school district could get their administration building built.
That's fair, but there's a lot more dynamics involved with the project that's in the county, currently sitting in the county area. And so there's a lot more factors associated with that.
Sure.
But if you were to ask my staff, and I want to speak for them, but if you were to ask my staff, what was the first project where the new council has said, hey, I'm done with building to the maximum?
Oh, yeah, it's
I believe
Yorba.
they're going to say Yorba. This is the project that sent the message that the new council says to our staff that, hey, we're not interested in building to the maximum.
Yeah, officially, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. But I think our staff has been sensitive to that in several instances, asking for changes, if I recall, to make things more palatable for,
Especially adjacent to residential.
yes.
Correct.
Yes. And I think by and large, again, because of complaints that we have not heard, I think it's been pretty successful. We have some pretty good integration, and it's difficult going from, industrial to housing. You've got to have, that step down or buffer or whatever size of streets and things, and I think it's been pretty successful. But you have to understand too, in the past, we weren't inundated with gigantic trucks all over the place either, like what's happening now. And it's a different ballgame. Is council comfortable with that, with staff looking at smaller buildings and bringing things to us ahead of time, letting us know that it's there, but not officially coming to us unless we want it to?
I'm fine.
Mark says yes, he's fine with that. Karen?
I'm fine with that. I'm also open to the recommendation for more, I'm sorry, Fred, what was it you said where we can write that into like a SCUP? If somebody were to,
Yep.
to take that in a SCUP, it's not just for these parcels, but citywide, so that would have to be part of the review process?
That's exactly
How
right.
how do we do that?
So your city manager suggested that perhaps that this be presented, some options be presented to the infrastructure committee. Your current standards could say development beyond X number, whether it's the floor area ratio, you want to reduce it somewhat. If you can go up all the way to 0.6, but beyond, like, let's say 0.5, you need the special use permit. So those kind of standards, or a setback can be up to, no less than 25 feet, but that requires a special use permit, otherwise it's 30 feet. So those kind of things could be analyzed by your infrastructure committee as to how to impose those, or give the planning commission that additional discretion to be able to reduce the footprint of a building. Because what your development services director is saying is that even though he and his staff can encourage a smaller building, ultimately a developer can dig its heels and present the largest footprint allowable under the code. So if you have that discretion built into the code, then the city retains the ability to really reduce the size.
So does that have to come back as an amendment to our ordinance?
Correct.
Or, and for clarification, as the Mayor Pro Tem stated, an applicant applies tomorrow to build the maximum building on this. That application is not complete in this entire process until we say it's complete. So if we changed some of this ordinance, they would still be required to comply with these regulations.
That's correct. Until your staff deems an application complete, and I understand sometimes that takes, what, 3, 4, 5 months? Or more. So even if somebody were to apply tomorrow, the chances are that that would not likely happen by the time you implement a new ordinance.
How long do you think it would take us to bring back the ordinance?
I defer to your staff.
Well, if it was clear direction, you said, look, we want a conditional use permit for any building greater than 50,000 square feet, it would probably be pretty simple. I mean, it'd take 90 to 120 days. If it's, we're gonna go and take a look at all the different standards, including setbacks, heights, and all that stuff, it'll take a little longer because we need clear direction on which specific standards you want to modify.
And I'd also like to look at the idea of if we're mainly concerned about proximity to residential, then what we might want to be doing is looking at performance standard that says if the parcel is within, let's pick a quarter mile, half a mile of any residentially zoned property, then they would have to go through this other process and meet certain findings to true that up. And so it would be different for those parcels that were near to residential versus industrial parcels that are, wholly surrounded, by a mile on each side by industrial.
That makes sense.
So
That makes more sense.
it does. I think, Nick, that's a good suggestion for both, for the SCUP and for all the performance standards, because let's face it, we have a arena allocation out there, and there's a potential for us to bring in different zoning of houses to not just
That
our
are
north
right
side of our
close
city,
to
but
industrial
the entire city that are gonna be close to industrial. And in fairness to the rest of our community moving forward, I think we owe that not just to these parcels of land that were covered by the moratorium, but to our entire community.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that could change in the future that way.
And that would help with yes, those potential future changes, because then those might roll out to newer areas that right now do not necessarily have a concentration of residential, but may develop
They will develop.
residential. And so we'd be able to implement those standards.
Yeah, well, I think we all, like the mayor says, we don't have a crystal ball, but we can predict that they're going to have to develop to meet our housing guidelines in the future throughout the city.
When we adopt that final housing element, we know it's going to be zoned possible residential. But I think a mile is a little bit extreme. It's going to have to be something a lot less than a mile.
And part of our research, we can look at other similarly situated communities, not necessarily just in the Inland Empire, but there are other regions of California that have similarly situated communities that have both a mix of residential and an industrial base. And so we can look and see if there's best practices out there that we can emulate or potentially lead on.
When I think of, Karen, when you look at, like, in Ontario, 4th and Mountain, where they have that mixed use, remember where there's.
Yes.
Okay, and senior housing and stuff. If you had restrictions there, that never would have been built. And yet it works very well because the residents can literally walk 100 feet or less to where they're gonna shop.
Yeah, there's
whatever.
definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach, but it gives
Right.
us some options, because that would definitely be different than what we're dealing with up at East End and Philadelphia.
Right, right.
Because, the one benefit you do have to some of those houses there is a majority of them are cul-de-sac facing, that does help. But you want to look at all of them, give the balance for the best shot for everybody there. So
Most
that,
of
yeah.
them are already across the street from buildings that are already built.
So that being said, Matt, how long would it take us to bring back that type of study? I know you said the SCUP would take like 120 days, but with these performance standards, how long do you think what's the staff's anticipation for us to look forward to come back?
I'd say it's definitely in the 4 months, 5 months range by the time we'd actually have an ordinance. Remember, this would most likely be a change to the zoning ordinance, so it would be required to be reviewed by the Planning Commission prior to coming to City Council. And so that will add some time.
Well, the other thing too is we've already got, which we as a council have to be sensitive to, we've already put quite a few top priorities on our current staff now. So I think we've got to be sensitive as to workload. You know, if we have to let something else slip, we need you to let us know, you know, in all fairness. But I do have a couple questions real quick before we go on. The 0.6 floor ratio. Now, you mentioned that has to do with if they want to build a mezzanine. So that doesn't really impact the size of the building. It's whether they can go up, right? Which is invisible to the outside.
On industrial buildings, it's generally invisible to the outside because you're gonna have that building height regardless if you have mezzanine or not.
Right.
So the mezzanine just allows for additional office. Usually it's additional office area.
Do we have requests to add more of that? Do we ever have complaints that that's too restrictive, they need more office space?
So I have only seen one request in the past for additional office space within the M2 zone, so the general industrial zone. Usually this comes up more in the light industrial zone. And the key consideration is parking. So if we have a business that's going to have, let's say, 80 employees, office staff, as part of their distribution center, well, they have to have parking for all of those people. So you tend to get to a point where you kind of start maxing out on what you can build in the on that mezzanine because you just don't have enough surface parking to meet the need for the business.
Oh, okay.
Now one of the other items that's kind of unique to Chino's development code when it comes to industrial is that we require a dual parking plan as part of the submittal for industrial buildings. So one assumes that it would be more of a warehouse type use and the other assumes it would be manufacturing. And we calculate out both parking demands based upon warehouse and manufacturing being higher because it has a higher population density in the building. And the plan has to lay out so it could meet both. So that the building could be adopted to manufacturing. And that has occurred in the past, where we had a more distribution type building, and it switched over to a more employment intensive use. And so all of a sudden you have less trucks going in and out and you have more cars because people are making things or packing things or adding another widget to a widget kind of business. And so we do have that. And so currently our development code tries to capture that by having both a manufacturing and a distribution use and making sure that we can make the parking for both of them.
Now, another question. I know years ago, the council and staff had worked real hard on providing buildings of various sizes so that an incubator building could move into a little bit bigger building, a little bit bigger, allow the growth so that they would stay in the city of Chino and not leave. Do you know if we're still kind of keeping that kind of balance?
So
Remember, some of the buildings also could have been divided.
They could, and that is often a preference when we have a new building is that they lay it out, the applicant lays it out so it can be divided. So it could be, two 75,000 square foot users or one 150,000 square foot user. I'm not a real estate expert, but what the industrial brokerage community communicated to us while we were asking them about this is that they felt that the city currently had the right mix of building stock, both at the small end and at the large end. And they felt that if we decided to kind of try and change everything to capture all small, it would develop, but that development time frame would be further out because the market is currently not demanding as much of the smaller buildings. But we do have a very good mix as it stands today.
One last question. If we require conditional use permits, that adds another layer of cost onto development, correct?
Yes.
And approximately how much does it cost for a SCUP?
So if you add a conditional use permit application to a site approval application, so site approval is essentially the design review, it's not as much as if this SCUP stands alone. So it's approximately $2,500 additional cost
So it's
to
not-
add a conditional
not a
use
gigantic-
permit.
Okay.
Right, because we're doing a lot of the same work for that application.
Mayor, the only other thing I would add is we did run a vacancy. We have 19 vacancies. The largest building is about 108,000 square feet. Majority of them range between 22 to 54. So of the 19, majority of them are under 100,000 square feet. And then when you see what's under construction right now as far as permits, the largest building is about 206,000. That doesn't include the one with the school district yet because that's not under construction. But I would say a lot of the larger buildings were pretty much built out. And the stuff that's being constructed now probably ranges between the 200 and the smallest building is about 8,000 square feet.
Okay, thank you. Any other last comments or questions?
I would just say, Mayor,
we got it.
if it's possible, maybe we could ask staff, I mean, tomorrow is December 1st, if you can already believe it, and asking staff to bring this back sometime in, no later than May before the budget would be nice.
Yeah, so the direction, if we can get a motion, is one is you don't need a motion to extend the moratorium, right?
No.
Or to not have a moratorium.
To not extend, right?
And so the motion would be to direct staff to work with the subcommittee and take a look at these development standards, specifically the use of a conditional use permit, and bring that back to the council for consideration. And we understand the time constraint. We'd like to get this done sooner rather than later.
Yes. And that would not include extending the moratorium, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I'll make that motion that you just summarized. Is there a
And just to be clear, the committee is
Karen
Councilmember
and
Gonzalez
Mark.
and Mayor Pro Tem
Yes.
Lucio.
Is there a second to the motion?
Is it going to populate or is it verbal?
She
Yes,
doesn't have
verbal,
it up
please.
for us to vote, so,
Correct.
It's
It's
verbal.
correct.
okay. Is that gonna die for a second, or is there a second?
Well, a second it?
Walt seconded it, I thought.
Well, I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to speak up. Okay, there's been a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Comstock,
Yes.
Councilmember Flores,
Yes.
Councilmember Pocock,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Lucio,
Yes.
Mayor Ulloa.
Yes. Okay, we have a second item, and I apologize we're going so late because we have a workshop, right? I mean, not us, but is our public workshop being held here?
It's being held at the senior center.
Oh, okay, so we're all right. Okay, item number 2, approve Pine Avenue Road emergency repair at Chino Creek. Staff report, Maria Frazier. This is to approve an emergency road repair at Pine Avenue at Chino Creek to stabilize current conditions prior to the upcoming storm season. Where's Chino Creek?
Off of Pine down there by El Prado.
Oh, okay. Yes, Maria?
It's okay.
We have Councilman Howie here tonight.
Oh, there he is.
Go ahead, Maria.
All right. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members, and audience. The item for your consideration this afternoon is the approval of the emergency road repairs of Pine Avenue and Chino Creek. During 2009 rainy season, a segment of Pine Avenue between Fairfield Ranch Road, Pomona Rincon, and El Prado Road was damaged due to the storm, and consequently, it was closed. Trying to figure out how to do this. Next.
Is it not
It's
working?
not working. There you go. Thanks, appreciate it.
Okay.
Additional deterioration has occurred throughout the years, causing one of the two 96-inch culvert pipes to fully dislodge. Consequently, only one 96-inch pipe remains in place today. Over the years, the road over Chino Creek has been washed out, and the creek bed is now exposed and further erosion, and flows continue to scour the stream bed. A 10-inch sewer line belonging to the city of Chino Hills exists below the road crossing at approximately 8 feet 8 inches deep. However, a recent hydrologically and hydraulic analysis completed for the Pine Avenue Extension Project revealed that the scour depths in the area are approximately 21 feet. Consequently, this pipeline is within the scour depth, which poses a health and a safety concern. If the pipe was to burst, it will damage and spill downstream. Lowering the sewer line is part of the Pine Avenue extension scope. However, the continuous scour could potentially damage the sewer pipe, causing it to burst and presenting not only a health and safety risk, but also damaging a very, very sensitive environmental area. All the jurisdictional agencies, the Army Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife, and the Regional Water Quality Control Board all agreed that time is of the essence to complete these repairs, not only to stabilize the sewer line before the upcoming storm season, but also because the work must be completed before the nesting season, which is before March 15. Therefore, they have granted the city with emergency permits needed to facilitate the expeditious construction of all these improvements. Portion of the work will take place in the city of Chino Hills right away, so staff has already notified them of our intent to complete these repairs and has requested their fair share contribution towards the cost of the repairs. The repairs will basically entail the removal of the existing damaged 96-inch culvert and the installation of 2 new ones and the removal and replacement of a section on the road to restore it. On October 22nd, 2021, an invitation for bids was released on Planet Beds and published in the Chino Champion on October 23rd and the 30th. And on November 9th, 8 bids were received. A summary of the bids is included in your staff report. Wright Construction Engineering Corporation of San Marcos, California was deemed the lowest and most responsive bidder with a base bid in the amount of $336,660.80. This project is scheduled to start December 13 and completed by January 7th, 2022, as stipulated in our Army Corps of Engineers permit. Therefore, it's staff recommendation, the council approves the staff report with the recommendations indicated. This concludes my report, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Maria. Any questions on this project or comments? Because seeing none, then I would entertain a motion and a second.
Mayor, I have a comment.
Sure, Karen.
Maria, could you just explain to the public in the staff report why we were allowed to tell that company to start the procurement due to the emergency repair request? So it doesn't appear that we just gave them permission to go start procuring material in that manner.
No, we actually reached, because of it, the time is very sensitive, and we do need to, per the permit, finish by January 7th. We reached out to the contractor and started doing the paperwork in advance. We did write a letter to the contractor, direct him to procure the materials in which we would take basically the risk if this didn't get authorized for council approval tonight, and they accepted. So the pipe has been ordered as of last Friday, and it has a tentatively delivery date for December 13th.
Thank you, Maria.
And Maria, the only other question I have is when we get the Pine Avenue extension to the 71 freeway, will this have to be redone again, or is it just going to be something that's going to be put over?
It's not gonna have to be completely redone, we're just gonna have to lower the line. What we're doing right now is basically preventing the line, the scour to damage the line and cause issues downstream.
Okay.
In addition, it provides us with access, so whether or not public will have access, at least public safety will have additional access, because right now you can't cross at that location.
So it would only be open to public safety?
I mean, we would have access, if this is fixed, we'd have control over the gate.
But that's only when it's dry, right, Matt?
Correct.
Yeah, when it rains, we will have access.
Okay.
But the gates will have to be closed.
So it's not going to be open like a regular street then, like in the summer, like, let's say, for example?
I mean, our goal is to open that up, but at a minimum, what we're solving is the sewer line that may, which is actually in the city of Chino Hills. And at a minimum, if we needed to have access, I needed to have public safety, whether it's fire or PD, to go through this area to serve this, we have access to that gate to open it. Right now, that gate is kind of permanently closed because of this event that occurred here.
Okay. Any more questions or comments? Okay, then I would entertain a motion and a second verbally.
I'll make the motion.
Motion from Councilman Flores,
I'll second.
second from Mayor Pro Tem Lucio. Roll call vote.
Councilmember Flores,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Lucio,
Yes.
Councilmember Comstock,
Yes.
Councilmember Pocock,
Yes.
Mayor Ulloa.
Yes. Okay, the item passes unanimously. And if there's no other business to come to us, we will adjourn to the Civic Center Master Plan Town Hall Workshop, which will be led by our city project consultant, Gruen and Associates. That's so if council members choose to attend it, they can. Otherwise, our next meeting will be on December 7th at 7 o'clock in these council chambers with our annual tree lighting ceremony occurring at 6 o'clock on City Hall lawn. Now, quick question, are we having the second meeting in December?
My staff always has stuff that we can bring to the council, so we'll take a look at that and I'll get back to you. I mean, if
Okay.
it's the council's desire not to have it, let me check with staff to see if there's anything that's time sensitive and get back to the council.
Okay, then
I'll
I
let you
would
know by
ask-
by
I would
December
ask
7th.
council members to let Mr. Ballantyne know if what their desire is for the December 21st meeting. Okay? Okey-doke. With that, we are adjourned. Okay, Karen, there.